afternoon, and I'd like to welcome you once again to an extremely timely and an extremely topical MET webinar. As we hold this webinar today, the American Special Envoy to Iran, Robert Malley, is in the region. Mr. Malley began his trip on Thursday to the United Arab Emirates before proceeding to Israel on Monday, and then on to Saudi Arabia and Bahrain. The tour will conclude on November 20th, just 9 days before world powers are set to reassemble in Vienna for the 7th round of talks on joint U.S.-Iran return, possibly to the JCPOA. We at AMET remain very concerned that these talks are nothing more than a fool's errand. The Iranians have already proven over and over again that they cheat. It was certainly proven by the Israelis during the Mossad's daring raid in 2018, by the fact that the IAEA, and by the fact that the IAEA has had great difficulty getting access to many of the sites. And as we speak today, we know that the Iranians have already breached the deal. They were supposed to enrich uranium to no more than 3.67%, and they have at least 25 kilograms at the 60% level of purity. Here to discuss the view from Israel about this is Brigadier General Avivi. We are incredibly honored to have General Avivi here. Amir is the founder and CEO of Habistonim, which is a national security group of thousands of Israeli officers and members of the Israeli public. Brigadier General Avivi concluded his service as the head of Auditing and the Consulting Department of the Israeli Defense Establishment, including the Israeli Defense Forces, the Ministry of Defense, and Israeli Ministry Industries. In that position, General Avivi managed more than 100 military auditors and advisors. He was responsible for the audit of military readiness, budgeting, procurement, projects, bids, cyber, logistics, infrastructure, and operations. General Avivi fulfilled various command positions in the Corps of Engineers, leading thousands of soldiers in a dynamic combat environment. General Avivi served as Brigadier Commander, Deputy Division Commander, and head of the Military School of Engineers. He also served as the aide-de-camp for the Chief of the General Staff of the IDF, Lieutenant General Moshe or Bogie Yaalon. General Avivi was at the heart of the policy-making process in the Israeli government and defense establishment during those terms. So Avivi has also served as the principal of the New State Solution Working Group. So it is indeed an honor and a privilege to have you, General. My question now is, indirect talks are due to begin in Vienna about the Iranian nuclear agreement in about 2 weeks. What is the honest feeling in Israel about these talks? Is this just something that Likudniks and those on the right believe are not appropriate, or just this cut across the board?
Okay, thank you very much. It's really an honor to be here, Sarah. Thank you for having me. I would like to first say a few words about the Israeli Defense and Security Forum, IDSF. It's hard for Americans to say a Bitchonistim, so in English we call it IDSF. I founded the organization a year and a half ago, and it had huge traction because there are many officers and commanders in reserve that are very worried about Israel's future, talking about its national security. And what we deal with is really looking at national security in the long term. We deal with the short term, but we look at the very long term, even generations to come. And we ask a very basic question, which for some reason is not being asked at all. And it's what is needed to secure Israel and make sure that it's prosper for generations to come. And when you think about the long term, it's easier to detach from everyday issues and really think what we need. I think it's for a nation that has been expelled twice from its land and spent 2,000 years in the diaspora, it must be a very serious question. I mean, we don't want it to happen again. This time, we are here to stay for eternity. And for doing that, we need to work very hard and understand really well what is needed, what are our red lines, what is our vision, what kind of borders we need, what kind of army we need, what kind of society resilience we need. And of course, we are looking deeply also at the security of the Jewish people all over the world. And this is an issue that is being challenged dramatically, I think, in the last years. And I think that possibly in the coming years, it's something that we'll have to deal with more and more. And it's Israel's responsibility to secure any Jew anywhere. And it's something that we need to really look in depth and deal with it. Talking about the Iranians, I think that the first thing that we need to understand is the way we view them is very different than the way the administration views the Iranians from the basic understanding what we are dealing with. And our understanding is that we are dealing with a regime that is an extreme Islamistic regime with a very clear vision. And the vision of the Iranian regime is world domination. They want to dominate the world. They want their religion, the Shia version of Islam, to be exported everywhere. And for doing that, they want to be a world power. To be a world power, they feel they need nuclear capabilities. And with these nuclear capabilities, they want to use it as an umbrella that will enable them to operate with their militias and army and forces all over the Middle East, and also not only in the Middle East, but also in Europe, America, and Far East, and so on. So they have a very clear vision, and the only question is really what do they need to do to achieve it? On the other hand, we have an administration that doesn't realize who they are dealing with. The Iranian regime is not a regime that can be reasoned with. Not a regime that you can appease. They will do anything needed to procure nuclear weapons. They will deceive in any chance they have. They did it from the first day with the JCPOA. And really, one of the things we're trying to do is really explain what we are dealing with, and I need to understand that if you don't, as Ted Roosevelt say, you can speak softly, but you need to carry a very big stick. If you don't carry a very big stick in the form of sanctions and in the form of a viable military threat, there is no way to achieve anything with this regime. Therefore, since they have advanced a lot with the nuclear problem at this stage, Israel is in a process of taking steps to secure itself, and if needed, dealing with the threats, even militarily, understanding that maybe at this stage we are alone, and we need to do whatever is needed to secure our country and the Jewish people. I believe that the Iranians will continue to deceive also in the coming talks. They are already doing it now again. And the big question is whether this administration is going to come to its senses or not and understand what we're dealing with. I still have hopes that this will happen.
Right. When President Biden was on the campaign trail and during the initial days of the Biden, administration, Secretary of State Antony Blinken had promised a longer and stronger deal. As we know, the Iranians say they will not even come to the table unless there is immediate sanctions relief. Do you believe that it is at all possible to get a longer and stronger deal as was promised? Or is it your view that the Americans will settle for less? That means more sanctions relief for less restrictions on the nuclear enrichment program?
Well, first of all, I think that the administration is not working on a longer deal. It's working on going back to the former deal. And the former deal is no deal. It's a catastrophe. And I want to simply explain why. First of all, in the former deal, there is a sunset, meaning that the deal was for 15 years. And basically after 15 years, the Iranian regime can basically procure as many nuclear weapons as they want. They have no restrictions. So this is basically kicking the can along the road and saying, okay, let's sell out the future of our children. Now, at this stage, already 7-8 years have passed. So if we go back to the former deal, which is anyway not relevant because it's not possible to go back to the former deal. It means that in 7 or 8 years, that's it. We have not only a nuclear Iran, but a nuclear Iran with multiple nuclear weapons. And I'll talk shortly about what this means. The other thing is that there was no real apparatus of inspection in the JCPOA. So basically from day one, the Iranians simply were able to do whatever they want. They built new sites because in the JCPOA, the only inspection was on existing sites. There was no inspection anywhere else. So the Iranians built very serious and built a big site like in Natanz, and there was no inspection on that. So what's the relevance of this deal? It's not a deal. The other thing is that this deal didn't deal at all with the long-range missiles. Now, the long-range missiles that are able to carry a nuclear weapon, they are not only built to reach Israel, they are built to reach the US and Europe. This is what they are doing, again, because they look at themselves as a world power. They want to reach this capability, and this threatens the whole world. This is not threatening only to the Middle East. I think that probably we are one of the few countries that can actually defend themselves against such a threat. We are very, very much advanced talking about our air defense. Not many countries can defend themselves the way Israel can. So I'm not sure it's even a big threat to Israel. It's a much bigger threat to other countries, and especially to Europe. So the JCPOA is not a deal. It really is no deal. And what Israel is saying, look, we're not against a deal. But if you want a deal, it needs to be a real deal. It needs to be a deal that ensures that this regime will never have nuclear weapons, that inspection will be real inspection everywhere, and the inspection needs to be on the scientists themselves, because the Iranians are able, for example, to develop nuclear capabilities in Syria. They don't even need to do it in Iran. So you need to really control the scientists themselves and be able to reach any point, anywhere, anytime. This is not what the JCPOA says. The JCPOA, for example, even in the declared sites, first you need to ask permission, then they will talk about it, and then after they make sure that they move things to other places, then they will bring the inspection. This doesn't make sense. The deal doesn't make sense. And unfortunately, this is not what is happening. We believe that if sanctions are released, what will happen is that's it. The Iranians got what they wanted and they won't do anything. And bringing back sanctions is really complicated because you need the agreement of many countries. So basically, you cannot have talks about a new deal if sanctions are not on. The only way you can bring the Iranians to the table if there is very harsh sanctions. And so, of course, we are against relieving the sanctions. Now, the last time sanctions were relieved during the Obama administration, the Iranians took the money they received to the US, they directed it to the militias around the Middle East, and this destabilized the Middle East completely, creating waves of millions of refugees that fled the region to Europe. So when we talk to the European Union and the different countries, what I say to them is that what they are doing doesn't make sense because they are pushing for a relief of the sanctions. And the first place that will suffer the consequences of that is Europe, because the Iranians will immediately take this money and use it for their militias, including Hezbollah, including the militias in Iraq and the militias in Syria. And this will create a huge fight between Shias and Sunnis with a lot of refugees, and these refugees are going one way, to Europe. So this is why relieving sanctions is a very, very, very bad idea.
So right now, one of the things that we at AMET do is try to put everything within the framework of how this affects America's national security interests. And forever we have been saying, that essentially, Israel is just the canary in the coal mine. It's America. Israel is the minor Satan. America is the great Satan. And there's a reason why they're working on intercontinental ballistic missiles. And we've been talking a lot about the Hezbollah bases just south of our border in Latin America and the tri-border area, and how these would be very easy launching pads. And, as Iran has created this pincer grasp around Israel, stretching from Tehran to Baghdad to Damascus to Beirut to the Mediterranean, they would like to replicate that just south of our border. So I think it's really important for anybody who is on the call that talks to their American representatives and congressmen and senators that you stress this is not just about Israel, because there's this naive feeling, we're done fighting the Middle East. We're sick of these wars out there in Afghanistan and Iraq, and we have to think just about home. But this is going to come back to bite us. So I wanted to also ask you, last week, Amir, you and Ellie Kirschenbaum proposed a really novel idea about the disputed territories. You described the two camps, the right saying that for security reasons, as well as for religious and national concerns, Israel has to hold on to the land. And the left is saying that holding on to the land indefinitely without granting full citizenship to the 2 million Arabs living there is a demographic nightmare. Can you describe your model for granting the Palestinians autonomy and self-governance, and why this would be any different from any models we have now?
So in my organization, we're actually talking about 4 different possible solutions. First of all, we believe that the solution is not a religion. People tend to stick to a certain solution, and no matter what happens on the ground, they stick to it. And we say, okay, we need to define the basic guidelines and parameters, and then there are actually quite a few solutions for this issue. But first, we need to understand us. We need to understand what we need, what are our national interests and national aspirations and so on. Now, Israel's width from the sea to the Jordan Valley is 45 miles. When I was in the States, I remember I was in Miami, and I drove to a meeting inside Miami. It was more than 45 miles drive, just in the city of Miami. So Israel's width is not even the city of Miami. It's nothing. It's 1 hour drive. And from this 45 miles, most of the area is the high ground of Judea and Samaria, with a little bit of shore, 9 miles of shore, and something like 9 miles of Jordan River. That's it. That's Israel. Now, there is no existence, there's no security, there's no control of the land of Israel without sitting on the mountain, without Judea and Samaria. So from a very basic security point of view, Israel, in order to exist, needs two basic things. One, it needs the Jordan Valley in its most broader sense as the eastern border. It's the only border that is viable for us to defend. And I'm talking about our sovereign border, not a security border. And a place where we will be forever, where we have towns where we live. There is no security, by the way, without population, without towns. You can see, for example, Russia and the US, when they operated in Afghanistan, or the US in Iraq. The reason why the US couldn't hold the ground and really control things, it's because they have no society there. In order to really be in control of an area, you need society. In Judea and Samaria today, I want to tell you something that you won't hear from many people, but that's the truth. It's not the IDF controlling the area. It's 500,000 Jews that drive every day in all the different roads, and they're creating control. The IDF uses this platform to mainly conduct operations inside the Palestinian cities to foil terror attacks. Without the population, you would need 20 IDF maybe, and even this maybe won't be enough. And then you will suffer from another problem, legitimacy. You cannot have an army in a place where your citizens don't live. It will always be for a certain time. So basically, as I said, we need, first of all, the Jordan Valley in order to make sure that any threat from the Middle East we can deal with. And I'm telling you that, for example, I'm not sure that in the coming years, Jordan will exist. I think that there is a good chance that it will collapse. I think that there is a good chance that the Iranians will gain control of Jordan. We cannot rely on other people to defend us. We need to defend ourselves by ourselves. The other thing is Judea and Samaria. In order to be able to really hold the ground on the high mountains of Judea and Samaria, we need a lot of Jews there. So really, the question is, okay, if we really understand that we need the towns, and also we need them from a spiritual point of view, because at the end of the day, all of our history, all the very reason why we came back to the land of Israel is in this mountain. All the Bible Belt, everything is about Judea and Samaria. How many times do we hear in the Bible about the sea? All of our history is in the mountains. So I would say from historical, religious, spiritual, security, however you look at it, we need to be on the mountains. And what we are told is something that is completely untrue. We are told the following. If we, for example, let's say, take even Trump's plan, apply sovereignty in the Jordan Valley and in the Jewish towns, people say to us, this will necessarily mean that we need to give 2 million Palestinians Israeli citizenship, and then it means that we won't have a Jewish state. And this is not true. It's not true, because when we talk about statehood, unlike security, security is very rigid. You cannot play with it. Statehood is endless possibilities. For example, take Italy. In Italy, you have 3 states. You have the state of Italy, you have the state of the Vatican. It's a state. recognized by the UN with passports and everything. It's a state the size of a neighborhood inside the capital of another state. Is anybody saying that the Vatican is under apartheid? The same goes for San Marino, a state recognized by the UN, completely surrounded by Italy, airspace Italian. The Italian army defends San Marino. Nobody is claiming that San Marino is an apartheid state. The US itself recognizes 50 different territories that exist around the world. And our territories are not a fully sovereign state. So when we look, for example, at Oslo, the way Rabin envisioned it, which is exactly Trump's plan, by the way. Rabin and Trump's plan is really similar. This would be an example of some kind of, I'll call it San Marino state. A state that is surrounded by Israel because it will be surrounded by the Jewish towns and the Jordan Valley. The airspace is Israeli, the overall security is Israeli. Going in and out is through Israel, and it still would be considered a state. I mean, they worked on this plan for 3 years with the best international lawyers. There is no problem according to international law to do it. This is one possible solution. Another solution might be relevant very soon. And I talked about it when we were in Washington. Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian president, as you know, is very old. People in the Palestinian Authority are completely fed up with the Palestinian Authority because it's corrupt, because it's terrorist, because it undermines their basic standards of living. And there is a tendency among the local tribes and clans to start thinking about disengaging from the Palestinian Authority. For example, in Hebron, the leading clan, the Jabri clan, they talk to us a lot. They want to be an emirate. By the way, Hebron is 50% of the Palestinian Authority economy. So they come to us and say, listen, we have 15,000 armed people. We can bring down the Palestinian Authority in a day. The only reason why we're not doing that is Israel, because you are defending the Palestinian Authority. We want to be a small state of Hebron and the surroundings, then we want to cooperate with Israel. By the way, the most successful country, Muslim country in the Middle East is the UAE, United Arab Emirates. Why they are so successful? Not because they have more oil or more resources than other countries. It's because they are based on city emirates, and these emirates are built upon the tribes, the local tribes, and it's not a government that is imposed on them from outside, like in Syria, like in Jordan, like in other places. Anywhere Europeans have imposed on societies people from outside, like in the case of Jordan, it didn't work out at the end of the day. In UAE, it's based on the local tribes, and this is why it's working, and it's working very well. So when Abbas dies, there will be probably a huge fight of the day after. Everybody knows that they have one chance to change. So the local leaders are preparing for a fight. Some of his successors in the Palestinian Authority also Hamas. So there will be a lot of anarchy. But at the end of the day, maybe we'll find ourselves in a situation where this Palestinian Authority, which already broke from Gaza is a completely different entity today, will break again into 2, 3, 4 pieces. And then we have to start thinking about a new model that has been promoted in the last years by one of our members, Dr. Moti Keida, which is called the Emirate solution, which is a very good one, by the way, very relevant to the way the Arab society in Judea and Samaria is built. This is the way we dealt with them also before Oslo, based on the local tribes. And this is also the way Palestinian Authority is handling itself. Most of the things that are happening on the ground are through the families, through the tribes and clans. This is the way they are built. Then we come and say, listen, this is solution within the land of Israel. But at the end of the day, we have a problem here. As I said, the land of Israel is 45 miles of width. Forget for a moment about Jews and Arabs. Can you imagine somebody thinking about the idea of sticking two nations in an area with the width of 45 miles? Does it sound to you something that can be done technically? It's impossible. And think about it. It's not only two nations. Both us and the Palestinians have a huge diaspora. Both us and the Palestinians are bringing a lot of babies, not like in Europe or in China. Where will we live? Doesn't make sense. We need more land to solve this issue. So here we have two other possibilities. One possibility is that for many years was a leading plan in the Labour Party in Israel, is the Jordanian Confederation. You know that in Jordan, 60 to 80% of the society are Palestinian. The Jordanian king represents less than 10% of his society. There is huge problems in Jordan. How long this will stay? 5 years, 10 years? What will happen if the Palestinians take control of Jordan? Do we have a plan ready to say, okay, here we are. Big Palestinian state on the eastern side of Jordan, the valley. It's real, it's possible, it can happen any moment. And then there is another solution. Looking around us, the one place that has really has a lot of potential talking about land is the Sinai Peninsula. The Sinai Peninsula is huge, almost completely inhabited. And as Sarah said, I've been dealing myself for a few years promoting a solution called the New State Solution. In this solution, what it does, it says, listen, half of the Palestinians live in Judea and Samaria, but half of them live in Gaza. And Gaza is a very small place. What's their future? I mean, there's 2 million people in an area with the width of 3.5 miles. What future do they have? Gaza is a place that needs a solution. And what we suggested is enlarging Gaza into the Sinai Peninsula, leasing the land, asking the Egyptians to lease the land to the Palestinians, and there you can actually build a contiguous, viable, free state along the sea for the Palestinians. And then it's really relevant to the vision that Obama was pushing. He was talking about two viable states living side by side. This is two viable states living side by side. The current two-state solution is two non-viable states living one inside the other. So I'm not against the vision. I think the execution is terrible. So basically, we have a lot of solutions, and none of them, by the way, undermine our security, our aspirations as a nation, our religious places, and so on. And the big problem is that Israel is not pushing any solution. It's not enough to say what we don't agree to. We need to put a solution forward, and there are solutions. And what we're talking with the government is, okay, look, these are the possibilities. Choose a solution. Tell the world what you want to do. Tell the Jewish people, tell Israelis what you want to do. We need to unite around a vision. Right. By the way, tomorrow morning, we have a meeting with 36 diplomats in Israel, among them something like 10 ambassadors. And what we are going to do tomorrow is present these solutions. Talk about them.
Excellent, excellent. I have my own questions about some of the solutions, and I think a lot of the solutions actually depend upon removing one critical element, and that is the constant incitement to hate and to murder Israelis and Jews in the UNRWA textbooks. And we just saw a report about Wa'id, a Palestinian newspaper for children, and there will be, no end to that, to the hatred. And, so that's something that all of us have to work on together. And in terms of the new state solution, doesn't there have to be a willing partner in the part of President Sisi? And would he be willing to absorb the Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas?
So actually, it's interesting because it's his idea. I mean, he suggested this solution in 2014 to Obama. The reason why he did that is that he understood that Egypt has lost its dominance and leadership in the Middle East. And the Egyptians needed something to become relevant. They needed something to make them the center of attention. So he suggested this solution to Obama, and Obama completely disregarded it. Also, he was a lot against Sisi and supported the Muslim Brotherhood. And so the Egyptians today, because they're not leading the Arab world, because they have huge economical problems. It's 100 million people, 30 million have nothing to eat. The Ethiopians are building now dams along the Nile, and Egypt is going to suffer from a huge problem of water. Egyptians need to get back to the center of attention. And if they become the focal point, if they become the state that has the key to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, this is something huge for them. When I presented this solution 3 times, I was invited to the British Parliament to present it because they were very interested about that. And in one of the meetings we had in the Parliament, I was there with Benjamin Anthony from our Soul Speak, today the Miriam Institute. We presented the solution, and then the MK we talked to, he looks at us and says to us, the first thing he says to us, you are saving Egypt. He immediately understood that this is a solution that first and foremost, before talking about Israelis and Palestinians, is a huge thing for Egypt. Makes them relevant, help them economically, and secure them. Because, by the way, if we don't do that with Egypt, Europe will see tens of millions of Egyptians moving from Egypt to Europe. This is what's going to happen. This is what we need to do.
Right, and we're running over, and at this point I want to turn the podium over to my former Egyptian colleague and wonderful, courageous dissident, Hussein Abubakar Mansour, who has been fielding some of the questions that have come in. Hussein?
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you very much, General Avivi, for such a wonderful presentation. As you may imagine, we received a lot of questions. I can already tell we're not going to get through all of them. So I'm going to try to combine as much of them as possible. One of the multiple failures of the JCPOA was not limiting Iran's ability to develop ballistic missiles designed to carry nuclear heads. Is there any intention in the Biden administration or the Mali team to address this or to fix this after going back to the deal, or within the framework of them trying to go back to that deal?
Well, one thing that is completely not logic to me is saying, let's go back to the former deal, lift the sanctions, and then let's start talking about a new deal. Doesn't make sense. Because the moment you lift the sanctions, that's it. You will never hear about the Iranians ever again. Why would they agree to change anything? If you go back to the former, I mean, I don't understand how people, I mean, you need to think like in business, what kind of deal is this? Right. It doesn't make sense. Right. So the only way you can really go forward is keep the sanctions, make them even harsher, intimidate them, and prepare also a military solution, and then force them to move to a new deal. This is the only way to deal with them. If we go back to the former deals, that's it.
We have a few other questions about actually Israel's defenses against potential Iranian nuclear weapons. You mentioned that Israel do have a defense system against those nuclear weapons. Can you elaborate on this?
Well, I will say two things. First of all, before talking about defense, I want to talk about attack. Israel has been preparing for many years for a scenario where we have to take our own destiny in our own hands. I personally oversaw for 3.5 years, the preparation for a possible attack in Iran. And we are preparing for such a scenario. I hope it doesn't happen. I hope that if we need to do something, it will be with the US. But unfortunately, when there was an Iraqi nuclear site, we attacked it by ourselves. When there was a Syrian nuclear site, we found ourselves attacking it by ourselves. So I don't know what will happen with the Iranians. Now, we need to understand, if Iran becomes nuclear, it's not only about what kind of deterrence Israel has against that or our ability to defend ourselves. It's about the fact that the moment they become nuclear, the following will happen. First of all the countries in the Middle East will become nuclear. There will be a huge proliferation of capabilities because everybody will be threatened by Iran. So the Saudis will procure capabilities, the Egyptians, the Jordanians, the Iraqis, and so on. Once everybody is nuclear and this area is so unstable, you will have terror organizations that will get nuclear capabilities and then will completely lose control. I mean, imagine Hezbollah with nuclear capability, what they can do. It's not a state. The other thing is that if they have nuclear capabilities, nobody will deal with them, meaning they will be able to operate freely with all their militias and army and so on and terrorize the whole Middle East. And they will also terrorize afterwards the free world. And nobody will be able to deal with it because they will be nuclear. Now, they learned from the experience of the Libyans. The Libyans is an amazing story. One day, without any country knowing about it, the Libyans managed to develop nuclear weapons. And one day they said, we have nuclear weapons. Everybody was surprised. Also the Israeli intelligence was surprised. And then Gaddafi came and said something amazing. He said, I'm willing to dismantle my nuclear weapons if you accept me, if you make peace with me, if I can be part of trade with Europe and so on. And the world said, okay, let's do it. So he dismantled the nuclear capabilities. And what happened next? Europe took a coalition, attacked him, and Libya was destroyed. So look at it from a point of view of Arab leaders. First of all, they say we cannot trust the West. Then they say the only thing the West understands is if we have nuclear weapons, they will respect us. Just as a country like North Korea, really a country with no economy, nothing, look what they are doing to the US. Okay, why? Because they have nuclear weapons. This is exactly what Iran wants. And they're not going to give up because they know that the nuclear weapon is what will ensure the survival of the regime. And this is the only thing they care about. Now, we have a very large range of air defense capabilities. Some of these capabilities can deal with missiles in space, because if you want to shoot Israel from Iran, we are talking about, in some cases, about missiles that go all the way to space and then into the atmosphere, and some of the capabilities are destroying them in space. But there are also other ways of attacking with nuclear weapons. But I think that the problem is, again, it's not how Israel can deal with a nuclear weapon. It's the question is what will happen underneath that, the umbrella this nuclear weapon gives to terror, to wars, conquering, and so on.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Speaking of the air defenses, we received multiple questions about the potential of a confrontation with Iran, that the Iron Dome system would be overwhelmed. I think this is a possibility that we've heard about several times in news and in different analyses recently. So we basically, we have requests for you to comment on that. How confident are we that Israel and its proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah, they can't launch a mass assault that overwhelms the Iron Dome?
Right, or Iran and its proxies. Right.
First of all, talking specifically about Iran and missiles from Iran, this is not Iron Dome. Okay, this is the system that takes care of Iranian threats is Arrow. And the most advanced Arrow is Arrow 3. Talking about Hezbollah, which has more than 100,000 rockets, and Hamas, and so on, if both of them shoot at us, definitely this will be overwhelming. And therefore, Israel understands that unlike an operation in Gaza, where you can defend for a few days with Iron Dome, if we have also Hezbollah, the only way to stop this is to send the ground forces as fast as possible to maneuver in Lebanon. And the Lebanese understand that. This is why they are deterred, unlike Gaza, because in Gaza we are saying, we don't want to conquer Gaza, we don't want to operate there, we don't want to send soldiers into Gaza, so what kind of deterrence is it? I mean, they know that we don't want to go in, so they're not afraid to shoot. But in the Lebanese case, they know that we will go and operate in Lebanon because we don't have enough air defense to defend Israel constantly against so many rockets. So we'll have to operate and conquer the area and destroy Hezbollah and destroy their capabilities all the way to Beirut, as we did many years ago.
Thank you for such a cohesive answer. We received also a few questions actually about the government in Israel. Basically, do you think the current composition or the current coalition with its composition will be strong enough to part company with the Biden administration if the shove comes to shove in order to take a unilateral military action?
Well, first of all, I want to say, and again, we're not a political organization, but I don't want to talk politics. I want to talk values. Very, very bad news. It's the first time we have a government that basically is controlled by the Muslim Brotherhood, meaning we have a government without a majority of Zionist parties. Now, in Israel, everybody agrees that we need a majority of Jews. Everybody talks about it, especially the left, by the way. So what do we need them for? Why do we need a majority of Jews? There is only one reason, it's political. We need a majority of Jews in order to make sure that our governments have a majority of Jews and Zionists to make sure that the policy in the land of the Jewish people is a Zionist policy. Now, when the Jews fight among themselves, and because of that, they choose to partner with a party that is basically partners with Hamas, and take our money and give it to a party that is anti-Zionist, hates Israel, and transfers some of the money to Hamas. This is completely crazy. Now, this is something, it's the first, and I really hope it's the last time that something like that happens. I think that looking generations from now, and historians will look at this period of time, The only thing they will have to say about it is what I said before. The Jews fought among themselves and gave the keys to the nation to the Arabs. This is what's happening now. And it's sad. Now, talking about the relationship between the government and the US, you know, usually the Palestinian strength is weakness. Now, this is what's happening with the Israeli government now. It's a very weak government. And because it is weak, the US administration is afraid that it will fall because this administration doesn't want a right-wing coalition. They don't want Netanyahu. So there is a problem. They want to push forward different things, but then they understand that if they push them forward, this might destabilize the government. So they're very careful in what they're doing and what they want to push. Now, talking about the Iranian issue, this is a completely bipartisan issue. Almost everybody agrees that this is an existential threat. Almost everybody agrees that we need to be able to defend ourselves by ourselves. And I think that if it will be needed, there will be a decision to do it. And I think that if there will be a decision to operate, the government will change. There will be a change of government. There will be, the Jewish parties will join again, because it will be a very dramatic moment. And we'll see a change.
Thank you. Actually, we received a question asking you, where can we go in order to read about your options for different solutions? Is there an essay somewhere?
So we are going to publish in our website. Our website is aide-de-camp.org.il. I'll put it afterwards also in the answer the questions.
Okay.
In our website, you will be able to see all the different solutions. We are presenting, as I said, we're presenting them tomorrow. For the first time, really, all of them. We're going to put it afterwards in the website. You will be able to see it.
General, could you just tell us the name of the website, or where we could find it, the address?
idsf.org.il.
Okay, that's idsf.org.il. Naomi, do you want to post that for everyone in the chat so we can? Okay, thank you so much. Excellent.
IDSF with an F.
IDSF as in Frank.
Like IDF.
IDF. Okay.
IDSF.
I will write it. Okay. Okay. There you go. Okay. Excellent. Any more questions, Hussein, before we round up?
Yeah, we have a lot, actually, as I said earlier. So we're going to take maybe one or two, depending on the time. Long term, can Israel continue its heavy and sole dependence on the United States for its national security and military defense, or is it necessary to start spreading our relationship, basically like the Arab Gulf is doing, diversifying the security portfolio with China and other resources, or will that hurt our current relationship with America?
Well, when I was young, for my bachelor's degree, I studied American history. And among other things, the relationship between America and Israel. And one of the things I learned when you study history, that history changes all the time. I mean, in 1947, when there was a discussion whether to vote in the UN for establishing Israel or not, both the State Department and the Pentagon wrote and said, no, we are against a Jewish state. Why? And you know, this is talking 2 years after the end of the Holocaust, right? They knew 6 million Jews were killed. And why? They said, listen, the Arabs are strong, these guys are weak. We go with the strong. And it was amazing at the end of the day that the President of the United States didn't listen to their advice, Truman, and the US voted for Israel, but after the independence war, they asked us to withdraw from all the places we conquered. We said no. And the answer was they imposed on us an embargo, military embargo, which continued from 48 all the way to 67, almost. At the middle, they said, the US sold us some air defense systems, but we procured everything from France and from Czechoslovakia and so on. And at the end of the day, and this is a lesson which I want you all to listen very carefully. At the end of the day, what made the change, what made the US decide to ally with Israel was a huge victory in the 6 Days War. When we won, they say, okay, these guys are serious, they are strong, we want to do business with them. So the only way to be relevant in this very, very tough world is to be strong and to be as strong as you can be and self-reliant and so on. And take in account that changes can happen. Therefore, definitely you need to be able to have other also relationships with other powers. I myself think that Israel should, at a certain point, change the way we are conducting ourselves now with the military. I don't think Israel needs to get this $3 billion the way it gets it, creating dependence. We don't need to be dependent on anyone. $3 billion for the Israeli budget is nothing. It's not 67 now. We are a very strong country and we are a rich country. But having said that, I think that we need to deepen a lot the relationship with the US, especially talking about allying and developing technologies, because what is happening today is that in the race, technological race, China and India and Russia are gaining strength. In some areas that surpass the US. Take, for example, the hypersonic missile that was tested now. Everybody was shocked from this event. So there is several areas like quantum computing, hypersonic capabilities, and other capabilities, cyber and so on, that an alliance between Israel and the US can create the ecosystem needed to compete with the East. So we have a lot to work together, but I want to see a relationship between partners and not a relationship like we see today. And this is where we need to go. It cannot happen in a day. But if I was Prime Minister, I would say, okay, in 10 years, we're signing new agreements, we're changing the way we're doing business. We want to bring huge investments from the US, develop things together, but again, as partners.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, so first of all, I want to thank you so much, Amir, for your really candid, frank, direct remarks with a message that everybody really needs to hear. Speaking about going from strength to strength, we need to strengthen our message. Hussein and I are on Capitol Hill almost every day, trying to talk about Israel's security. And we need your support in order to continue to do this. We've been bringing almost every single week some of the best strategic experts from around the world into your living rooms and others, so that people understand exactly the nature of the Middle East and what it is that America's one democratic ally is really up against, without any illusions. So in order to continue our programming and in order to continue our really important work daily on Capitol Hill, please go to www.ametonline.org and support Amet. And also, I would love it if you can go to the Habas Danim website at www.isdf. I'm sorry.
Yeah, IDSF. I will write it again.
Okay, www.isdf.org. And please, I want you to strengthen the voice of Brigadier General Avivi and his wonderful colleagues.
I also sent my email if anybody has questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much. It's truly a pleasure. And now we'll be signing off.